Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite ways of making a boring chord progression sound more interesting. This all started when I was about 16 years old. I'm on a family vacation on this cruise ship, and I wander into one of the piano bars. It was empty, and I start playing on the piano. And then eventually, the guy who's actually supposed to be playing comes in, and he lets me continue, strolls up behind me, and checks out what I'm doing. He says, "Don't worry so much about the chords you see on the lead sheet." And that didn't really make that much sense to me. I knew there was some wisdom in there, but I didn't know what that meant. Like, if you've got chords there, how do you ignore them? Like, what else would you do? Over the years, I've found lots of different ways of adding new chords, substituting chords. There's so many possibilities out there. But today we're going to talk about one specific technique that I've found that's really great for harnessing all of the different possibilities so that it's actually more of a system for creating new harmony for a particular chord progression. So it's a little bit easier to sink your teeth into and make some immediate progress. So we're going to use one of the most basic chord progressions, one of the most basic tunes, Twinkle Twinkle Star, and I love to use this as an example. It's the tune that I use again and again in my course, Chord Theory for R&B Piano, because it's one that everybody knows, and the progression is simple enough to start with, so it's a great way of building on top of something that's already as simple as it gets. Here we go. We're just going to work on the first phrase. Sounds like this, as you know. We're just going to focus on that much. Now, here's the tip. I call it reverse engineering or working backwards. But what you're essentially going to do is pick the chord you want to land on and build a chord progression out of that target chord, if you will. So the progression that I just played was C major, C major, F major, C major. All right. C major, C major, F major, C major. Now, remember the tip. Ignore the chords on the lead sheet. In this case, the chords on the lead sheet are these four chords right here. So we're going to not ignore them completely, but we're going to use them as a springboard for some more adventurous harmony. But as I said, we have to work backwards. So I'm just going to use this final chord here in the mini progression as our target chord, the chord we're aiming for. Now, this is where we have to start using some music theory. And I'm going to think about ways of arriving at that C major chord by coming up with chord progressions I know work. In other words, cadences. Cadences are like ways of resolving tension. So if the resolution of tension is on this C here, that's where we're resolving. What's one of the most basic cadences? Well, a 5 going to a 1, this kind of a sound. That's G major to C major. Each one of these chords, by the way, you can analyze in terms of Roman numerals, which is one of the best ways to analyze chords. This is what I use in my chord scale charts, which are a really great resource to have. I'll pull those up real quick so you can see what they look like. So here are my chord scale charts. This is the one in C major, and you can see all of the chords within C major right here. And then below that, I have the Roman numerals, because again, you want to be talking about chords in terms of their functions, their number. So remember, we want to arrive at this C major. That's our 1 chord, and we can use all kinds of progressions that arrive at any particular destination. I talked about the 5 to 1 cadence. In this case, we actually have a 4 to 1 cadence, also known as a plagal cadence. You can hear that tension, resolution. Or if I do the 5 to 1, G major to C major, tension, resolution. Now you can also have multi-chord cadences. So for instance, in jazz, we talk about 2-5-1s a lot. A 2-5-1, if you go back to the chord scale sheet, again, we're in C major right here. And zoom in, I'll just erase this because we don't need to have all that extra stuff there. But if we talk about a 2-5-1, we've got the 2 chord, which is D minor 7, the 5 chord is G7, and then the 1 chord is C major 7. You don't have to add the 7s on there. That will give it a more jazzy sound, but the important part is that you understand that 2-5-1 is a very common chord progression, especially within the jazz world. There are also chord progressions even longer than a 2-5-1. That's only 3 chords. You can go like 4, 5, 6. You can really build out these chord progressions quite a bit. But before we do that, let's just try applying this 2-5-1 to our C chord right there. We're starting on C major, and then we're going to go to C major again. But then instead of the F, we're going to start ignoring the existing lead sheet here. We're going to take this F out and instead insert a 2-5. So the 2 chord is D minor 7. In this case, we're going to use a 7 chord to make it a little bit more soulful. And then we're going to go to a G7. That's going to be our 2 chord and then our 5 chord resolving to the 1. Sounds like this. Here we go. 2, 5, 1. Now, if we want to keep this soulful vibe going, we can add a major 7 to the C chord and give it a C major 7 type sound. Check this out. Here we go. 2, 5, 1. Really nice. But as I said, we can extend the chord progression even further back. So instead of just 2, 5, 1, let's take another example. Let's build it out to a 3-6-2-5-1. This is another common jazz chord progression. In fact, one of the best things you can do to build up your vocabulary of mini chord progressions like this, cadences, whatever you want to call them, is to analyze existing jazz progressions. That's the word I'm looking for. In a sense, you're opening up any jazz fake book and analyzing the chords, and you're going to find progressions like the 2-5-1, the 3-6-2-5-1. You're going to see things like the backdoor 2-5, secondary dominance. That's a longer process, but it will build up that vocabulary for mini chord progressions that you can then insert into these boring chord progressions that need some extra love. Okay, so we have our 2-5-1. 2, 5, 1. Nice. But we're going to work backwards now. We're going to extend the progression further backwards. Instead of just doing 2-5-1, we're going to try out 3-6-2-5-1, which is a great progression. Now, what is the 3-6-2-5-1 within the context of C major? Well, we can look at the chord scale chart. It's right here. We have the 3 chord is E minor 7, and here's the 6 chord, A minor 7. So let's add that in here. We've got E minor 7 and then A minor 7. That's going to sound like this. So C major, E minor 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. Here it is again without me talking. That's nice, but we're going to make it even more interesting by, instead of playing A minor 7, right here, we're going to take this out, and we're going to actually play A7. Now, A7 is going to set up this D minor 7 brilliantly. The A7 is the 5 of D minor. If you think about a D harmonic minor scale, for instance, this one right here. Within that scale, and by the way, I have a chord scale chart for that too. You get them all for free if you want to download them, linked somewhere on the screen and in the description below. But within that harmonic minor scale, you've got this A7 chord, which resolves beautifully to D minor. So when you add it into this context of the 3-6-2-5-1, you get this sound. Check this out. So much more interesting. We can keep pushing it further by taking the existing progression here and starting to tinker with the actual chords, the individual voicings. So maybe on the A7, we add a flat 9. That would sound like this. That B flat right there, that's the flat 9, going to D minor 7. And then maybe instead of just a G7 chord, actually this is a G9 because the A right there is the 9, but we could do like a sharp 5 or a flat 13 going to C major 7. Let's do one more example using this same chord progression to mess with, but instead of approaching C major, let's use a substitute for C major. So instead of C major, we're going to use a chord that's very similar. It's going to be an E minor chord. So if we take this out and we write in E minor, now we can use E minor as our target chord. By the way, why is E minor so similar to C major? Well, I'm talking about the actual notes within the chord. If you take a look here, C, E, G, that's your C major chord. And E, G, B is your E minor chord. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you add a B to this chord, to this C major chord, making it a C major 7 chord, you actually get the E minor chord embedded within it. So long story short, these two chords are good substitutes for one another. But let's go back now and use E minor as our new target and work backwards from there. We're reverse engineering. Now, here's one thing that I didn't mention, which is one of the most important things, and that is as you come up with these new chords, you have to make sure that they still work with the existing melody. I'm not changing the melody to the song at all. Let's hear what this sounds like. Let's say the lead sheet looked like this with C, C, F, E minor. It would sound like this. Okay, it's a little dark for Twinkle Star, but let's go with it. All of the notes in the melody are still working nicely, but now what we're going to do is ignore the chords we have on the page here, except for our destination chord, which is E minor. So let's ignore this F again. We don't need to worry about that. Let's use the same cadence that we used to get to the, what was it? I guess it was the C major that we had before. We're going to use a 2-5, but now we're approaching E minor. So what's the 2 and the 5 chord of E minor? Well, to figure that out, what I would do is go to the chord scale charts once again, and specifically the harmonic minor one. So E harmonic minor. The 2 chord is F sharp minor 7 flat 5, and the 5 chord is B7. So let's try out those 2 chords. Now remember, we have to make sure they still work with the melody. Hopefully we can make that happen, but I'll write that in here. So we have F sharp minor 7 flat 5, also known as F sharp half diminished, and then the B7. So let's try this out. C major, C major, and then we're going to do F sharp minor 7 flat 5, B7, E minor, and I'm going to go to E minor 7. That's nice. One more time without me talking. Check it out. And here's one more way of applying the same principle to this progression. Let's do another instance of this working backwards, but choose a new target chord. This time let's choose C major as our target chord, and instead of starting with C major, let's do my favorite, the 2-5, going to this C major. So we're going to do a quick 2-5-1, that's D minor 7, G7, and then resolving to probably a C major 7. So we have D minor 7, and then I'm not going to be able to do G7 here because we have a C in the melody. I guess we could. That's all right. But instead of this crunch right here, let's just make it a G7 sus. That will support the C. So, and then go to C major 7. So we're starting with a cadence. We're starting with a 2-5-1. So much cooler. That's the juicy version of this song. And as I said, I use Twinkle Star so much in my course, Chord Theory for R&B Piano, because it is such a useful template for building on top of and teaching all of the different possibilities that are out there in terms of enhancing a chord progression and the voicings within. So if you want to learn more about that course, check it out. It's linked below. And also, if you want to just learn more voicings and get more voicings under your fingers and just get that like dictionary thesaurus-like approach to learning voicings, you have to check out my collection, Sick Chords Volume 1. It's all of my favorite voicings for all of these kinds of chords, like major 7 chords, minor 7 chords, dominant 7 chords, with all of the alterations. So check that out, and we'll leave it there. If you want to watch another video, you can click right over here, and I'll see you over there. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.